Should brands be bringing out a product just because the market says you need to? Let's talk about that. Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Often. I'm Daniel, today we're taking fragrances, and this is a practical review of Lorenzo Pazzaglia's Bloody Smoke. These reviews are for fragrances that I have a lot of experience with, multiple wears in many situations, and I'm meant to give you a general idea of what it feels to wear the fragrance. As per usual, I do a lot of research before buying fragrances, but I don't really like to go into details about notes and accords. I don't think that they help the end user. I'd rather talk about the wear experience as a whole. Today's fragrance is probably the most unknown and the most misunderstood from the Lorenzo Pazzaglia brand. Why is that? Before we talk about the fragrance, let me just talk about Lorenzo Pazzaglia as a whole. Lorenzo Pazzaglia is, first of all, a fragrance brand, but it's also the name of the perfumer for the brand. He is a self-taught perfumer that basically started out as a cook. He's actually still a cook. It's his main profession. He has a restaurant with his family, which he still runs to this day, and perfumery has always been a second gig for him. And I've been listening to a lot of interviews with Lorenzo Pazzaglia lately just because I like the charm of the guy. He's a very humble, very down-to-earth, very relatable type of person. He said that he started his journey in perfumery purchasing Chinese fragrance oils just to get a feel of what was out there. And he started mixing these oils up and presenting these concoctions at his restaurant. Fairly quickly, he understood that you actually need good ingredients and good prime materials to make good fragrances. But his very intuitive, very creative, and very simple type of approach to perfumery has led to creations which are what I refer to the Italian chaotic style. I always say this term, and to me, a lot of the niche Italian perfumers, the uber niche Italian perfumers like Lorenzo Pazzaglia, and even the more mainstream ones like Alessandro Gualtieri and his products, they all have this connection to them. They all have this very experimental, very creative, but at the same time, very chaotic approach. When it comes to perfumery and in a similar manner, cuisine, Italians are fun in this way. They just throw together ingredients and kind of make it work. And Lorenzo Pazzaglia has definitely combined his ability to create maybe really interesting dishes for his restaurant to making really interesting perfumes for his brand. Another thing about Lorenzo Pazzaglia, the guy and the brand, is that he tends to like very mass appealing, very likable fragrances. And on the surface, a lot of them might seem unapproachable or unconventional. If you take something like Black Sea, it might be a little bit rough around the edges. But once you get just beneath the surface, pun intended, you actually realize that Black Sea is a fairly conventional, fairly approachable niche take on a marine scent. So nothing really surprising there. He actually created his most unique fragrances based on Black Sea. I actually think that the best and most interesting fragrance that he creates are the one that lean a little bit more on that edgy niche fundamentals like his Marine Accord for Black Sea, but then get combined with this more mass appealing, likable scent profile, like in the case of Sexy or in the case of Dream Sea, where he basically adds vanilla to a marine scent. Another thing that really characterizes Lorenzo Pazzaglia's fragrance is the power, the projection, the longevity, and just overall performance. Lorenzo Pazzaglia, as I was saying before, is mostly and first and foremost a fragrance enthusiast. He started out as a fragrance enthusiast. He has and still buys a crap ton of fragrances, uses them, and he just overall in the scene. And like a normal consumer, he wants power, he wants performance, he wants the wow effect. And he creates fragrances exactly for that. And I can't stress enough how interesting his interviews are, because in those situations, you really get a grasp of how normal he is. He's just a frag enthusiast, like all of us. And all these things come together as the reasons why I like Lorenzo Pazzaglia so much. This approach is such a breath of fresh air compared to these master perfumers from France that think that they're royalty or celebrities. I mean, they're just making smelly water, for God's sake. So just let's tone it down. Let's be realistic. It's just products, you know? Yes, there's an art form to it, but again, creativity is creativity, and I like humble approach to art. That's just my take. Before diving into the full review of this fragrance, I want to quickly go back to the topic that I've teased in my intro. Should products be designed based on marketing request or by request of the investing stakeholder? Obviously, there are a lot of answers to this question. If you're in for the profit, you have to somewhat follow marketing trends unless you're creating them yourself. If you're more into the artistry part of things, I would say no, because you have to somewhat keep your brand identity and brand image. In the case of Lorenzo Pazzaglia, I feel that he's such a small brand with a very quirky, fun identity that he has to keep He has to keep this going. He has to keep his image going. He has to keep the fun, laid-back vibe of his fragrance brand, because that is ultimately what is attracting a lot of the customers. And when it comes to Bloody Smoke, I get the strong impression that this fragrance was sort of pushed onto the market by someone else. It wasn't his idea. And actually, this impression was confirmed in a lot of reviews. According to Lorenzo Pazzaglia, Bloody Smoke is his least favorite fragrance. He developed it because a friend of his said that he needed an incense fragrance. He needed a more oriental fragrance. He did not want to do that. And Lorenzo Pazzaglia, if you know, he's not really into oriental style fragrances. He doesn't really like oriental notes like oud, like incense, like other stuff. He tends to go for the more fruity, the more marine, the more wow-inducing notes out there. He really did not want to make this. He really didn't. But somehow his buddy convinced him that the marketing was demanding something like this from the brand, and that he needed to put out an incense fragrance. And this is the result. Bloody Smoke is easily the most unpopular fragrance from the brand, and even one of the most misunderstood, especially because the name doesn't really tell the full story. And I really don't want to open this chapter about how Lorenzo Pazzaglia names his fragrances. I find a lot of his names incredibly childish, incredibly simple, and very much not appealing to me. And Bloody Smoke is probably one of those edgy names that he came up with just because he thought it would sound cool. I don't know. Anyway, the fragrance does not smell like blood. It does not really smell like smoke. It just gives a bad impression. Bloody Smoke is first and foremost an incense-forward fragrance. It has a lot of likability that Lorenzo Pazzaglia has injected into the incense genre, but overall, it's just a likable incense fragrance with a lot of underlying sweet notes. But we're going to talk about the wear experience and the scent profile after we cover the presentation. Presentation-wise, Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances are pretty iconic. His bottles look like nothing else on the market, and I do feel that this is part of the charm of the brand and part of the reason why the brand has managed to distinguish itself throughout the numerous new indie artistic perfume houses that emerge every year. All of his fragrances are extract de parfum with high oil concentrations that range from 35% to like 45%. They're all insanely powerful, super long lasting, and very, very performing overall. This one here is the 50 ml format. It's the biggest format that he offers. The other unconventional one is a little bit smaller. I think it's 28 ml. I've never seen one in real life, but from the pictures, they look super cute. The bottle quality for Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances is pretty mid to low range. You can easily see the seams beyond this lacquered finish. The sticker itself is very, very well stuck on, but it kind of feels cheap. It feels a little bit artisanal in a way. The black lacquer finish is actually really easy to scratch, so that's not a plus. The caps for these fragrances are definitely the highlight of the presentation in my mind. These black pebbles feel heavy, they're metal, they're really, really nicely finished. They even feature a little owl head, which is his logo. They're really good. They slide on, pressure base, very, very secure. It a little bit depends on tolerances. They might vary bottle to bottle. The atomizer assembly is pretty decent. It does the job. It feels a little bit part spin. It feels a little bit plastic, but it sprays decently well. Let's give it a couple sprays. I've been wearing this as my scent of the day, as I usually do when I review fragrances. It's a very easy wear despite its potency and the relatively unusual incense notes. Well, unusual maybe for most people. I love incense. I wear a lot of incense fragrances, but objectively, I have to say that you come across as a little bit new age, a little bit hippie-ish. And some people really associate incense to church. In this case, the incense is very, very well balanced with a lot of sweet notes, and it makes it very likable. Still incredibly unique though. Topping off the presentation, let's talk about the price. Price for Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances is actually quite good. These 50 ml fragrances retail for 145 euros officially. I've never seen them at discounters. I don't know what the price is like in the US. And for the performance and unique scent profiles that you get from Lorenzo Pazzaglia, I feel that 145 euros is totally fair. He actually really cares about the consumers. He wants the most people possible to be able to experience his fragrances, and he's fully aware of the silly price increases that are in the fragrance market today. But let's get into the scent profile and wear experience. What does Bloody Smoke actually smell like? So as I mentioned before, Lorenzo Pazzaglia's Bloody Smoke is first and foremost an incense-based fragrance. It's that simple. Yes, you have a lot of Lorenzo Pazzaglia's fun factor added in, a lot of sweet notes, a lot of weird sort of mass-appealing notes that really contrast well or bad with the incense. And I say well or bad because it really depends on your idea of incense. I'm a huge incense fanatic, as I said before, and as you've heard me say in many, many videos. And the way he puts together incense with these gourmandish notes is a little bit jarring to me. This is very reminiscent of something like Amouage Fate Man. As I also mentioned in the Fate Man review, I actually put this as my first option. This is a much wearable version of Amouage Fate Man. And Fate Man is an absolutely beautiful scent by all means, but it can be a little bit heavy, it can be a little bit too much. This has the same power and performance as Fate Man, still a little bit of that funky spiciness, but everything is wrapped up in this more mass appealing container, which ultimately makes for a much more enjoyable and much more easy wear experience. I think that the comparison with Fate Man all comes down to this very sweet incense and how it's portrayed. I have other sweet incense fragrances, but they're not really as spicy or as funky. There's a lot of cumin in here. There's a lot of black pepper, I feel. It has a little bit of an edge. It has this tactile, slightly culinary feel. In my fragrance options section of Fate Man, I actually described this as a little bit culinary, like you're in a back alley of a busy city with an open window that is sort of like giving you this scent profile of something being cooked in that house. And that culinary vibe is kind of mixing in with the city smog and city funkiness and dirtiness. I kind of get these images every time I smell this, and you might think to yourself, well, that doesn't smell really good. But you have to understand that this is a very deconstructed version, and everything is much more smooth and rounded off than it actually sounds like. When you first spray this on, you're immediately hit with this massive dose of black pepper and other energizing spices. It has a tiny bit of funkiness. There might be some cumin in there, but it never really goes BO. It never really goes stinky per se. It's just very, very interesting, very oriental, very Middle Eastern smelling. The massive vanilla that is in the base of the fragrance is immediately detectable from the start, and it just kind of like wraps all this spiciness, all this incense in this very beautiful rounded off cocoon. This is a very unique scent, especially for a Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrance. And I'm still thinking about the name. Why did he name this Bloody Smoke? As childish as it is, there has to be some sort of meaning to it. Why bloody? I think that he is leveraging the slight metallicness of the scent profile. Maybe he's leveraging the slight city vibe that this gives. Maybe it's a reference to the color that he sees the scent profile as, because this is a very red, very dark orange, rich sort of color that I get when I smell this and when I think about this. It's the same sort of color that I get again from Amouage Fate Man. The scent profile itself is actually fairly well balanced. It pretty much sits in the mid of the tonal range with some zing on the top and some rumble at the base. The zing at the top is mostly due to that black pepper, the very energizing black pepper that I was talking about before. And the base notes are pretty much just the vanillas that round everything off and just like blanket everything to make it more palatable. The scent doesn't really evolve much top to bottom. It's a fairly simple, fairly predictable, fairly stable scent. It basically smells like incense. Most of the differences that occur top to bottom revolve around the fact that the pepper tends to peter off and just fade off, and the vanilla tends to surface from the base, smoothing everything out, as usually occurs in the transition of fragrances. But as I said before, this is pretty much an incense fragrance first and foremost, and this incense fragrance really accompanies you throughout the wear experience. It's a very sweet, almost smoke machine-like incense, very wispy, very heavy. It basically fills your lungs and you're like inhaling this white smoke that really sits like a fog. And the fragrance is actually super long lasting. It sits on your skin like a fog. It kind of feels like your skin is fuming in a way. I get this image of dry ice and water, you know, that very thick fog. And imagine your skin just like emanating this fog. And now obviously I sprayed it on my arm. So I get this image of me like waving my arm around and this fume just sort of like puddling around my arm and just puddling on the floor from my arm. And again, it's super thick, super weighty, but not too dense because again, it sits in the mid-tone. Very interesting. I like this a lot. I like wearing this a lot. And despite Lorenzo Pazzaglia not liking this fragrance and not really putting a lot of effort in it, maybe name-wise, maybe marketing-wise, I still enjoy it. I'm still happy to have this. When it comes to practicalities, Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances are always excellent performers, as I said. The longevity on Bloody Smoke is absolutely excellent. You get 8 hours plus of wear. It's a fairly predictable, fairly stable wear experience with a nice projection curve. It's very loud in the beginning, but it fades off in a very slow, linear manner. It really never becomes a skin scent, maybe because of this foggy wear experience that it has. It never really gets absorbed by my skin. I don't know. It really depends on your skin, but this really sticks around on me for a very, very long time. When it comes to use cases and versatility, the first thing that you have to acknowledge is that this is an incense fragrance first and foremost, a very spicy one at that. So you have to like incense, it has to fit your vibe. Overall, I feel that the incense in here is not too in your face, it's not too obnoxious, it's not really too weird. And despite the massive sweet notes aiding the likability, this is still an incense fragrance throughout. And that being said, the versatility is actually quite decent for what it is. I wouldn't necessarily wear it to the gym just because it doesn't really fit the vibe, but office wear, I mean, I've done it. It works fairly well. I do feel that this is more tailored to maybe evenings and events, just because it has that relaxing, very meditative type of feel to it, because all incense do that to me specifically. Maybe evenings that are a little bit more relaxed in nature, even dinners possibly, I think that this would work really well. When it comes to seasonality, the heavy sweetness in here is more conducive to colder months. I'm not a fan of wearing vanilla fragrances in the heat. I got this in October of 2024, so I haven't really had a chance to wear it during the summer. Again, the summers here are super mild anyway. But again, it would be a little bit more cloying than I would want it to be. And I like incense. I like incense in the summer, but it has to have some sort of fresh aspect to it, and this one really doesn't. When it comes to demographics, Lorenzo Pazzaglia gets a double thumbs up for me. His fragrances are super unisex, and they have this fun, lively vibe to them, which makes them very, very appealing to a more younger audience. I'm not saying that these are not good for a more mature audience, but they have a very over the top, over cartoonish sort of vibe that is not necessarily elegant. I would not wear this out for a very elegant event, or rather, you could, but you have to really play on the contrast. It really depends on you, but overall, again, demographic-wise, this is incredibly versatile. When it comes to imagery, narration, and storytelling, Lorenzo Pazzaglia's are not really about that. They're not really designed with that in mind. They're very perfumey type of fragrances. They're meant to be smell-good fragrances with a unique twist and with a lot of character, but ultimately, Lorenzo Pazzaglia is very simple, very humble, and he just wants to smell good. So these are not meant to evoke anything. Yes, you can dig your head in there and kind of look around and find images, like I get that back alleyway from a city here, but it's not really about that. This is more about wearing something fun, wearing something quirky, and just standing out from the crowd. Okay, we're at the part of the video where I give you some options for my reviewed fragrance. For Bloody Smoke, I really wanted to lean into the incense part of the fragrance, but I really wanted to give you some actual options to the fragrance, because ultimately, spoiler, I do not really recommend Bloody Smoke because Lorenzo Pazzaglia has so much more to offer, and there's so many beautiful incense fragrances out there, and accessible, likable incense fragrance at that. And I really wanted to give you options that kind of range from the most fresh to the most deep. The first one here that I want to showcase is Amouage Enclave. This one here is the first fragrance that I ever reviewed on the channel. It's such a fun, fresh, palatable take on incense that is very, very approachable even to the newbies of the genre. It combines a very beautiful, warm, ambery base that radiates off the skin like nothing else, with a very interesting top note of mint. The mint in here is a little bit bubblegummy. It's a very fresh toothpaste type of mint, but for some reason the combination of these two is so unique. I have nothing else that smells exactly like this. And again, it has this almost like camphorous feel. This radiates off the skin. It's so fresh and deep at the same time. It's an incredible dichotomy of smells that keep bouncing back and forth, making for a very, very unique, very fresh incense wear. This is so modern. It's so innovative in a way. I really applaud Amouage for bringing something like this out on the market. It's not too complex like other Amouages, but it's such a breath of fresh air in the fragrance landscape, and I love it to death. It's my first fragrance reviewed, and I'll keep it forever. The second incense fragrance that I want to showcase brings down the tonal range just a little bit. This one here is Gurlain Encens Mythique. It's such a beautiful, rounded off, very, very elegant, very likable incense. This doesn't even come across as an incense fragrance per se. It has a lot of rose, it has a lot of wispy spices up top, giving this effervescent cola-like accord. I really like this. It smells so incredible. I got this in a trade fairly recently, actually. And when I first sprayed this on, I was completely floored by how beautiful and just rounded off and just so well designed this fragrance is. I really like it. I've been wearing a ton of it lately. It just puts me in such a good mood. It's so elegant and relaxing. It's not really transportative or narrative. It really doesn't bring me to any place. It's just a really good perfume designed by one of the best brands on the market to make this sort of thing. It's a Gurlain. You can't really go wrong. It's super elegant. It's super refined, really put together, and it's actually surprisingly affordable. approachable. Now, I'm not really sure if this has been discontinued or not, but I've seen that you can still pick it up, and I really recommend it. If you're a fan of Encens, but you're looking for a more wearable take on Encens, more rounded off, more likable version of that, this is a very, very strong candidate. My last Encens fragrance option for the day brings down the tonal range yet again. We're talking about Stephane Black Gemstone. I already talked about this fragrance in another showcase of options. I can't remember for which fragrance, but this is a very beautiful, very dense, very black fragrance. And yes, I might be a little bit biased from the bottle design and from the marketing in general, but this is a very deep, very rich, sort of a myrrh incense combination. It's super deep, it's super sweet. Not really in the beginning because it opens up very smoky and almost bitter, but it rounds off so smooth. It's a very smooth take on Encens. It has this sweet myrrh that really rounds everything off. It has this very sticky, resinous, possibly labdanum that really sticks everything together. This has insane gravity. It has insane longevity. It has insane presence overall. It's very, very dense. It feels like a black hole. And that's actually a thing that I referenced in my last section where I featured this as an option. It's a very beautiful, very rich, very elegant incense fragrance. I can totally see this as an option for a more introverted person that still wants to convey their presence to the room without shouting, without being obnoxious. This is a massive fragrance, massive in gravity, massive in wear experience. I really like this, and I should definitely be wearing this more often. There's something about this really dense resinous core that is so attractive and so alluring to me. Okay, back to Bloody Smoke with my final recommendations and overview. As I said before, I really can't recommend Bloody Smoke to the majority of audience because it's not the best Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrance. It's that simple. It's just not. It doesn't really fit his style, doesn't really fit his vibe. It feels a little bit forced, both in concept and in naming. And just the fact that I know that he wasn't even interested in putting the thing out in the market is a giant turnoff for me. I like products that are filled with passion, that are filled with inspiration, and that make the perfumer in this case, or the designer more in general, very, very proud. This product feels a little bit half-assed, feels half-baked in a way. I still like it, I still do enjoy it. But again, it doesn't feel like Lorenzo Pazzaglia. And I don't even know why he decided to take the advice and put this on the market, because Encens as a note is not even very popular. Maybe he thought that he could leverage more of a Middle Eastern public or something like that. I'm not really sure. Ultimately, if you really like Lorenzo Pazzaglia, like collecting his fragrances and have all of his fragrances, just get Bloody Smoke and call it a day. But for the majority of people, I do not recommend this fragrance. There's so many more nice and fun and approachable incense fragrances on the market, especially the ones that I gave you as options in the three, let's say, categories of tonal range. This one here to me is a little bit of a pass. I'll be probably keeping this because I have a lot of Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances. I really like him as a person. I like his brand. I like his vibe. But I'm not going to be wearing this a whole lot. I have other fragrances that serve sort of the same purpose, that has sort of the same vibe. And I don't really need this as a fragrance per se. This is so not a recommendation for me that I don't really even recommend going out and getting a sample. Just because if you really want to smell something like this, just get a sample of Amouage Fate Man if you can. That's a much more complex, a much more interesting take on this. Much more edgy though. I think that the only people I can recommend this to are, again, the diehard Lorenzo Pazzaglia fans, or people that actually have Fate Man and that want something a little bit more wearable for day-to-day use. That's about it. I'm still happy I have this. I'm still happy to have smelled his creations. I think that the topic of conversation of having heavily market-fueled or market-incentivized products, in this case fragrances, is a really interesting one. And I really would love to hear your takes down in the comments. I actually opened this topic of conversation back in my review of Gris Charnel Extrait, when I said that the Extrait version was basically designed to really appease the market trend of going towards Extrait, and it was completely not necessary, not only unnecessary, but it was ruining the fragrance design and fragrance concept as a whole. The original Gris Charnel, I feel still to this day, that is a way superior fragrance to the Extrait. Just to close off this video, although I'm not necessarily telling everyone to go dive deep in the marketing of a brand to learn about their values, their intentions and ideas, I do want to encourage people to be a little bit more proactive and a little bit more aware of what they're consuming and where the product that you're putting your money towards is coming from, both in ideas and in concept. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to video, feel free to subscribe. It's always massively appreciated and helps the channel. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. It's never taken for granted. See you in the next video as per usual. And until next time, cheers.